Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. I'm your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It is my delight and pleasure to introduce you to my guest on this particular episode, Professor Ganesh Bagler. Ganesh started as a physicist and then, had a very interesting trajectory through his career where he evolved into a computational biologist and then subsequently a computational neuroscientist, and then subsequently into computational gastronomy and very, very fascinating research on food science. His one of the main motivations is to make food computable. In fact, that's something very intriguing and also very fascinating. He's a professor at the at the Indraprastha Institute of Information Technology. It is in Delhi, and he has also worked in various different laboratories across the world. And his research group looks into very interesting aspects of food science and food research through computational approaches. And he also has a wonderful website. I would strongly suggest all of you to check. I will anyway link it in the show notes, where you will find some fascinating information about food database, novel recipes, and also building algorithms. So in that sense, he brings computational machine learning, artificial intelligence, and food science on one single platform. With this brief introduction, I'm delighted to welcome the Ganesh.
Thank you, Pawan. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast and to be talking about my journey into science and how it has evolved over a period of time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ganesh, give us an overview of your origins. Where were you born, and what were the kind of formative years like? And then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I was born in south of Maharashtra on the border of Maharashtra and Karnataka. Solapur is the town where I was born, a very small, sleepy town where probably I would say nobody bothered too much about science, but there was a lot of encouragement for arts and other aspects. But most of the people were busy trying to make their livelihood, it being a predominantly migrant city, because historically speaking, it's a textile town, railway town. So that is where people from Karnataka, people from some part of Andhra, but mainly from Karnataka, had migrated due to the famines in the North Karnataka. My great grandparent generation was one of those which migrated. So yeah, I was born in a lower middle class family. I never had scarcity of food or other resources for that matter, but at the same time there was no abundance as well. So but I had a very happy childhood, I must say, with a fairly good education in Sholapur. That's how it all began, and curiosity for science was there right from the beginning, right from my school days, and I used to do well in studies. But then it eventually I had not imagined that it I will end up becoming a scientist. Therefore, when I look back at my journey, starting from Cholapur, a small town, all the way from there to Delhi, I at times I feel very amused that I could achieve whatever little I could achieve. I did that in this span of time.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it also says that uh, there is a different viewpoint, because people who are born and brought up in places like Solapur. Solapur actually has a very rich culture, and also it's a very interesting kind of amalgamation of culture, because I know people there speak Telugu, Kannada, and Marathi,
Yeah.
and that's one of the prototypical aspects of border kind of districts. And is that an important influence on you, Ganesh? Because I am always curious, because I know few people, even I have my colleague Umakant and other people who
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
have,
No problem.
yeah, Uma is also from that particular place. And I see that they, first of all, are multilingual, very cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan is not only about, living in Mumbai. Cosmopolitan also is in a different definition. So I would want to get a little bit more insight from your side on that particular point, how it influenced growing up in that particular place. Mm,
I guess first of all, being born in such a place gives you exposure to variety of
mm,
languages,
mm,
variety of ways of looking at things, thinking about things. not discriminating people just because they talk in a different tone or an accent. All of these come as a natural package of being born in a place like Sholapur. In fact, I call Sholapur as a triple point in a physics.
Mm.
It's Kannada, Telugu, and Maharashtra. All
Maharashtra,
three
yeah.
of them come together. Politically, yes, it is in Maharashtra, but it's a triple point,
Mm.
actually speaking. So to me, that exposure to all of these languages, me at home speaking in Kannada, but otherwise at school and from the books that I used to read, I'm a outright Marathi.
Mm.
So that way, it was an amazing exposure to a variety of culture. And I guess, personally, I believe that's the primary idea, that humility and be acceptance to a diverse languages and cultures naturally comes to me. And the moment it comes for cultures, it also comes for religions also.
Mm.
That's incidentally happens there. So I love, therefore, being a Sholapuri, having been inculcated with that culture, and that sense of acceptance to anyone and everyone. And that, when you take it at an international level, becomes a virtue, if you ask
Gotcha.
me.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. It's such an important point. Uh, on this same kind of viewpoint, it also has to do with the fact that you would be able to also get sampling of various different food. Was that also an important part of your upbringing? Because I'm very, very fascinated by the way you actually transform. Because I know I'll come to that part, because you got an MSc in physics from one of the best universities in Pune University Physics Department, which is actually an outstanding place to really get educated in higher education of physics. But I just am curious because uh, we will go into the transformation as we go along in the chronology. But I'm just curious whether that also influenced you to take up something what you're doing now, or is it something which you picked up later?
So might have, it could be a subconscious influence that might have been there,
Hmm.
by virtue of being exposed to different kind of culinary styles that I have been subjected to as a child. But primarily speaking, it was the Kannadiga cuisine
Hmm. Hmm.
and the Marathi cuisine. And within Marathi cuisine, there are a variety of subcultures or sub cuisines that I was exposed to over a period of time. But you know what? Oftentimes it is a job of it becomes a retrospective job of trying to find out what might have influenced me as a child. But trust me, I have been rather an agnostic about food,
Hmm.
and fine dining, forget about it.
Hmm.
Until I was late in my teenagers, went to college, I never had an exposure to anything which is close to what can be called as fine dining. But yes, a different exposure to different kind of cuisines and food I always had, but I was never fond of food, trust me.
Hmm.
It isn't as if I was a foodie or something. And in fact, it's on the other hand, um, don't forget, I told you that my great grandparents had to migrate because there was a scarcity of food and there were famines in North Karnataka,
Hmm.
from the
Hmm.
Raichur district
Right.
where we belong to, right? And that makes it, on the contrary, there was a common adage which used to go in the family, that whatever is on your plate, eat it.
Eat it.
Don't complain. Don't complain about wanting to eat something special and all that. So for me, food was never a matter of luxury,
Hmm.
never a matter of enjoyment per se. Of course, we enjoyed our food on a festive occasion, etc. But that's the kind of a culture I've come
Gotcha.
from, and it has never been a foodie culture that have grown into in my family.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I can kind of see the point of the jolad roti playing a
Jola
very
roti, jolad roti, correct.
jolad
Yeah,
roti.
the white sorghum bread. Yeah,
Yes,
in
yes.
English. Yeah, yeah,
English, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because that has unique kind of a culture of itself with Raichur, Bidar, and other places also at a higher temperature kind of regions, and they have unique cuisines. So tell us a little bit about your school education. How was it? Like, what was your experience? And what was it growing up in Solapur as a school child? And also your friends' influences and influences at home, etc.
Pretty much. At home, I would put it this way, that my parents were largely uneducated. My father is educated up to seventh standard. Mother is uneducated. The best thing that happened from my parents is that they realized that I am fairly bright student
Mm, mm,
uh, when it comes to academics, and otherwise also I can manage well with life. They realized that, and they left me loose.
mm,
They allowed me to do whatever I wish to do, whether it is participating in the scouting movement, whether it is participating in the quizzes and the competitions that I used to participate as a school child or even as a college goer. And similarly, so that freedom, which I might not have got had I had a helicopter parents,
mm,
which today many of the middle class parents tend to be, I was lucky enough to have such kind of parents.
mm,
That flexibility and freedom that I could get to do whatever I wish to do. Trust me, even when I was in college, for example, I bunked college for 2 whole months to participate in an in an experiment called Prayog Surya Jatra, which
mm,
is basically in 1995 there was a solar eclipse.
mm,
Around that time, there was a scientist, agricultural scientist called Arun Deshpande. He organized just outside Solapur district. On his field, a large one, 50-acre area, he organized a fair, a science fair, where he invited volunteers to join and educate primarily the kids from villages around the Solapur district, so that they can come learn about science in the pretext of trying to understand what is a solar eclipse.
mm,
Solar
mm,
eclipse was used as a premise for the whole exercise, but it was a huge experiment. It started sometime in the month of perhaps in the July and ended till went on till December, when the solar eclipse happened on 25th of October
mm.
1995. And that period of time, I bunked my college, and no sane parent would have let their child in the second year of Bachelor's of Science to bunk college for 2 whole months. But trust me, the amount of learning that I got in that whole 2 months was more than a year
Yeah.
that I could have gotten from my rote textbook education that I would have normally. Not that our college was that bad, but
Mm,
most of it was textbook education.
mm,
I wouldn't have got that experiential education had I been just being in my
mm.
college. So
Yes.
that was the kind of way my parents and a family influence was there. Talking about friends, trust me, it's a small town.
Mm,
It's known for, in fact, rowdyism.
mm.
Often it has had a history of rowdyism.
Yeah.
So my parents would be more worried about me getting
Mm,
into influence of
mm,
rowdies rather than anything else. So my friends were, some of them were, experts in all kind of, rowdy techniques, if you ask me. So some of them are still are doing something similar, I would say. So that's the kind of a friend peer group that I had. Some of them were, of course, were into academics,
mm, mm,
but yeah. So I had a mix of friends, and I would mix up with anyone and everyone,
mm.
right from a friend who would be into a little bit of gundagardi and rowdyism, but at the same time, friends who were academically very bright and were career minded, all of them. So I used to have a fantastic friend circle. In fact, my at one point of time, I remember one of my school teacher would wonder that how the hell Ganesh manages to have friends from one end to the other end of the spectrum. So that's how my school life was, and college
Wonderful.
life. Yeah,
Wonderful, wonderful. See, I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Ganesh, because see, this is something which people will have to also get exposed to it, especially to the listeners and also the people who are watching this, is that many a times people who do evolve into scientists have very varied backgrounds, including, let's say, various different economic backgrounds, various different cultural backgrounds, and it just like any walk of life, scientists also come from various different parts of uh, samples of culture, so to speak, in
yeah,
in that sense. One of the aspects which I would want to also kind of touch upon is this particular phase where you're talking about also probably had an impression on you, as you beautifully mentioned about that solar eclipse kind of experience. I know that you also do a lot of science outreach and science education related things. You're seriously interested in it, and also philosophy, including education and other aspect of it. I've also observed, generally speaking, people who come from these kind of varied backgrounds have a slightly more grounded approach. Not that other people don't have, but they have a different viewpoint of looking at how education has evolved. Because one sees that there is a very big impact of education on their own lives, and therefore they would want to also kind of transfer that knowledge to other people. So I'm just curious whether you also had. I know that you went to Sangameshwara College, if I'm correct, in
Yeah.
Solapur, which actually is a well-known college in that particular place. And I'm just curious, what was the kind of exposure you got, the science education you had, because generally off town, or rather not the mainstream cities, are the if you are not coming from that, not many people know how the science education is in such kind of places. Generally,
Yep.
for example, in Pune or Delhi or anywhere, there are age old colleges which are very famous for various different reasons,
Yep.
but these are all places which have given us very good scientists. Here is an example. People are actually listening to him, but there are also so many other examples I am aware of. So would you want to give us that notion of how you got really interested in science? Because that spark, of course, you had internal kind of motivation, but there should be some external influence. I'm just curious to know about that.
Indeed, indeed. You rightly said that unlike in a place like Pune
Mm,
or Mumbai, where you have historical track record of educational institutions which have been imparting knowledge, there are stars who have been there for a long time. Plenty of them. A
mm,
place like Pune, for example, has plenty of them.
yeah,
So many so that despite being a very good scientist, you will be shadowed
mm,
in the glitter of all these
yeah,
stars.
yeah.
A small place like Sholapur or similar others, whether it is Nashik, Nagar, or any other part of India that you might want to consider, you will not tend to have such stars when
Mm,
it comes to academia and science, because most of them would have moved out from the town by the time they have become big, incidentally. I think my early class teachers, the way they taught me science, because I remember one of the earliest of the science experiment that I had done was to take a bunch of jawar, the sorghum
mm,
seeds,
mm,
and find out after putting it in water, wet cloth, and after a certain number of days, a few days, find out how many of them have germinated and to what extent they have germinated, to find out the potency of germination of these seeds. And I still remember doing that experiment. So that experiment was meant as a one of the experiments at the end of the textbook. I did it. My teacher did not discourage me, on the
mm,
contrary, encouraged me. My mother did not discourage me,
mm.
asking, wondering what the hell am I doing with these seeds. And this is something which my grandparents have been doing for ages, in
Ages.
terms of sowing the seeds and
Mm,
getting the grains out of it. So what is this quantification business? She did not question that,
mm,
right? So that's one of the encouragement. Similarly, I think at higher education level, as well as at college level, you tend to have a few teachers who are really, really influential. I must say that. Okay, so I can tell in BSc, for example, we had one of the teachers called Gidveer sir. I
mm,
still remember classical mechanics. One of the classes of the many that he must have influenced me was a spark. I was sitting on the first bench. I was listening to him, and the way he was explaining one of the chapters of classical mechanics
mm,
was a spark for me. And that was something which made me think, rather reinforced my wanting to be a scientist. Otherwise, there are multiple paths in life. Not that I was extremely career minded, despite
mm,
being fairly bright in terms of academics and getting marks, if
mm,
that is what
mm,
matters to you. But then at the same time, this wanting to be a scientist, that desire, was triggered by people like Gedweser and a few others. While you don't get too many of them in a place
mm,
like small town like that,
mm,
but
mm.
you do get a few of them
Few of
who
them.
can influence you. And one more point I would like to
Mm,
make out here is that for me, other than teachers in the schools and colleges and parents who in a way helped me in getting onto my path, there was one place, one coordinate which helped me a lot. It's called Hirachan Nemchan Library.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
this was one library where this is one place where I lied to get into that library that I'm 18 at the age of 16. And I actually got into the library, and I used to spend plenty of my time, at times even bunking college lectures, and sitting in the library in the reference section, going through Tata McGraw-Hill,
Mm,
encyclopedia, for
mm,
example,
mm,
and many many other life book from LIFE, those
yeah,
magazines that used to come,
magazines.
right?
Yeah.
Plenty of them. So I used to get all kind of ideas, right from becoming an archaeologist to becoming a biologist to becoming a physicist. So I had a variety of dreams laid out in front of me thanks to this library, which was available and was kindly run by a trust and was being made accessible to people like me at a very very nominal cost. So
Mhm.
these are my influences.
Wow, fantastic, fantastic. I'm very glad that you emphasized library. That is a point which we bring up often in Pratidwani, because the centrality of a place where you have access to books, be it a physical library or sometimes even online kind of a system, is probably one of the most important kind of as you mentioned, coordinates to go and really enlighten oneself. And it plays a very critical role because without very high quality input, you cannot actually have a high quality output. So library is a great place to actually have that high quality input. You're right.
In
Yeah.
fact,
So tell us a little bit about your transition then from Solapur further into, I think, Pune, where you
yeah, yeah.
probably tell us about that particular.
I mean, I don't know whether I am biased about it or not, but I always see most of my stages as adventures.
Mm.
Because from moving from Solapur to Pune for my master's education was not so straightforward.
Mm.
I got admitted into master's in physics department, and I was in the waiting list. And in the meanwhile, I was doing very well in my university, which is the local Shivaji University at that
HRST.
time. So that with that I could get admission into Shivaji University Kolhapur. So I had gotten admission there, and I was waiting to be admitted to Pune University, being such a prestigious place to be learning physics from. And eventually, after a couple of weeks of joining Shivaji University at Kolhapur, I did get admission into the physics department, and I was overjoyed. So
Mm.
I joined a physics department, and those 2 years were most wonderful and most torturous at the same time.
Very interesting.
Because you can imagine I coming from a college system which
Mm.
has annual examination to a
Yes,
semester
yes.
system which has got three internal exams, two best of three, which means that any point of time either you would have just given an exam or another 2 weeks you will have an exam.
Yeah. Oh man. Treadmill.
and and it was a treadmill, and the kind of people who were teaching you and the kind of expectations that you were being put with is that of Professor PV Panat, RK Patak, DG Gangal, and these people are stalwarts in
Yeah.
their areas, and their expectations are at par with a student coming from Ferguson College, SP College, Wadia College, and we coming from Sangneshwars and Walchans of Sholapur College,
Mm,
Sholapur, town. We were like struggling.
mm,
Trust me,
mm.
struggling. But one of the first impressions that I can give you is that apart from the struggle part of it, the wonder part of it is that Professor R.K. Pathak had just returned from USA,
Mhm.
and he had this, American accent. He reproduced Feynman Lectures of Physics, Volume 3, Chapter 1, Quantum Mechanics. He
Nice, nice.
reproduced the whole lecture in his first date, and we were enamored by it, completely enamored, flattered completely. And I was one of those guys who was interested in astronomy and
Yeah.
astrophysics, relativity, special theory of
Mm,
relativity to
mm.
begin with, primarily speaking. And the third thing that got me by the time I reached for my MSc was quantum mechanics,
Quantum
and which I
mechanics.
ended up specializing in. I ended up doing 4 courses of quantum mechanics. So that was how I transitioned. It was a shock, I must say
Mm.
that. Yeah.
Wow, wow. Fabulous, fabulous. I also know that there are some of my own colleagues who actually are also your probably batchmates and friends. And
Yes, yeah.
I have also kind of talked to on this podcast various people who have graduated from that department from where you also graduated, the Pune University Physics Department. And even now, I do have some kind of interaction. I talk to students and also some faculty members. It is a place which has really given us a lot of good people. In fact, that is also kind of tribute to the state university system, because generally a lot of people put it down.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, as state universities are not up to the mark, but Pune University has its great share of contribution to really bringing out people. And was it also the place where you got exposed to other aspects of sciences, Ganesh? Because I'm that's what the real crucial element is, your switch, which I'm really curious to know how you
Right.
did it, and you evolved, and you can see how you've evolved in a beautiful way into a completely different avatar almost in from your education. I was there a seed of that switch there? No?
Might have been.
Mm,
But let me tell you
mm,
that I think I carried it right from my childhood, right from Solapur itself. I think
mm,
that seed is simply can be put into one word called
mm.
curiosity.
Nice,
Uh,
nice.
or okay, curiosity and adventurous nature,
Mm.
suicidal adventurous nature, if you may wish to call it so. Okay,
Nice.
because it is suicidal at times. Because if you are career minded, if you want to make a CV,
Mm.
you don't get into suicidal adventures. You get into adventures, but don't get into those which are potentially going to kill you, right? I did follow whatever I wanted to do,
Mm,
right
mm,
from I came to Pune with the clear intention of going to Ayuka and doing my PhD in a place like Ayuka or Ayuka.
mm,
Very clear. But by the time I came there, I was enamored by quantum mechanics. So I did both. I did
mm,
specialization in quantum mechanics and
mm.
a thesis in Ayuka.
Nice.
Okay, with Professor Sri Anand.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so that's what I did. And well, both of them after finishing, I couldn't get into astrophysics. It was so competitive that I couldn't get into astrophysics in any of these places. But to answer your question, yes, exposure to a variety of topics, I had carried it for a long time. Remember I told you that I was in library. I
Mm,
used to
mm,
visit library and be there for a long time. I never only
mm,
read physics or
mm,
only mathematics. I read biology because my exposure to DNA and anything related to DNA was happened in actually because I never studied biology after 10th standard. It
mm,
happened in a library. For that matter, even I read history books. Believe it or not, I
mm.
used to finish Marathi history books. I was
Yeah.
primarily
Mm,
talking about written in Marathi, and those I used to finish literally
mm,
overnight or over 2 days. I used to finish one book at a time. People used to wonder how fast could I read. So that exposure and wanting to do things that are curiosity driven was, I guess, was the seed behind what I've ended up doing. Not to mention that I was a risk taker, and luckily
mm.
my parents never they never had any clear expectations
Judgment.
out of me. They said do well, that's
Mm,
all. Do well, and do well can be done in multiple ways,
mm.
thankfully. So I did whichever way I felt I could do.
Wonderful. There is a lesson for all parents here also, especially in the day and age where there is so much of scrutiny, pressure, and also many a times over expectation from their own children. This is also a very liberating attitude to really develop. I'm not telling that one should actually leave their kids to their own devices, but there is an important lesson here because that's a very crucial element of giving as much freedom to any person who would want to do what they want to do. The other point I want to know, Ganesh, is in such kind of occasions where you also mentioned that curiosity aspect and also the other element of adventurous, being adventurous, uh, it also means that you know uh, you are taking a step where you are ready to actually face your own consequence, right? Because uh, it also, one element which probably you did not mention but I can mention is kind of an internal confidence. it's not something which is going beyond confidence, but there is a confidence that you would be able to do something, right?
Yeah.
Because when you it's a in the it's always a benefit of hindsight that now you are professor, you would be able to recollect that, but at that moment there is uncertainty. You do not
Yeah.
know how it's going to actually evolve. But here again, you have taken that step and you're ready to take that step. That is not actually also a blind kind of jump, right? Because you are probably having something in your mind where you're calculating and also looking at what are the possible things you can do. And hey, all said and done, you have done fantastically well. So all things worked out in some way or the other. But I would
So
want to know. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There could be a bias here.
Yeah.
You might be looking at me,
Survivor
100
bias.
instances of mine,
Mm,
people like mine, if you were to take,
mm,
maybe 95% of them or 97% of them would be dead, in the sense they
yeah.
wouldn't be as successful, or wouldn't
Yeah.
have achieved as much as I would have done. So I could be a rare case, having got that combination of curiosity and adventure. So
Absolutely.
as Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls it,
Mm,
it's a silent evidence
mm.
which is missing. So we are not looking at you're not looking at the cemetery where people are buried, and who are equally adventurous, but
Mm.
unfortunately they were not as successful.
Aspect. So this is actually brings to one of the main points I want to mention. See, generally when the students are told to follow your passion, that's actually become almost now a cliche, right? You follow your passion. But one of the elements which is equally important is to follow what you can do well.
Yeah,
Because that probably gives you a better opportunity for you to evolve your own life. Because all said and done, you cannot ignore economics. Right?
you cannot, you
Because
cannot.
if I understand correctly, you also had to ensure that you were paid to do what you are doing.
Yeah,
Otherwise, a lot of times, including myself, I would have not been able to do even a PhD without some kind of a financial kind of assistance from the fellowship what you get and things like that.
exactly.
So it is very interesting because sometimes it's easier to take this wild adventurous step if you are financially secure, but here you actually did not have, if I understand correctly.
I did not have. In fact,
Mm,
I had Eklavya Fellowship,
mm,
which a tiny amount of money
mm,
given in Pune University,
mm,
and to the extent that, very weirdly, when I could have eaten in the refectory of the institute of the university, Pune University,
mm.
I would bicycle down all the way up to Khadki, and that time there used
Yeah.
to be something called Zhunka Bhakar. The jawar
Jawar,
roti and
yes.
the Zhunka, right? Just to save money, because I think that time it used to be for 2 rupees.
Wow.
Whereas,
Nice.
I mean, I was nobody was forcing me to do that,
Mm,
and
mm,
I wasn't my economics were not so bad that I wanted to save 10 rupees. Therefore, I went there. But I don't know. I thought that was easy way of getting around, saving some money and doing it. So I did those things at those point of times, because whatever reason I felt it was necessary. And one more thing I must say, that while I did not do subconsciously calculations about what might work well,
mm,
sorry, consciously,
mm, mm,
but subconsciously, you're right about it. I might have had my gut feeling
mm,
about what might work well better
mm,
for me. I might have had that. That is how I have made migrations.
mm,
Biology was just at the turning point
mm,
in
mm, mm,
2002 when the first genome was published.
mm,
But I was not a follower. I was an early mover, but I
mm,
did
mm.
move at the right
Right
time
time.
when biology was becoming a data science. So timing also can be important here, apart from
One
having a gut feeling. Yeah,
That absolutely, absolutely. Being at the right time and also the right place.
yeah.
Because Pune University, if I am correct, also actually has had a bit of a history of exposing their students to biophysics. If I'm correct, I don't know
Yeah.
whether you did have some kind of an exposure during that time.
Not through that. Again, the
Uh,
weird thing. We had biophysics.
uh,
Pandit Vidyasagar,
mm,
Professor Pandit Vidyasagar used to be the biophysics person,
mm,
professor who used to teach that.
mm,
I didn't do it through that route.
mm,
I actually used to discuss with my zoology and botany friends. That's how I learned, not
Wonderful.
through formal courses. Yeah.
Wonderful. This is actually the crux of the point, because the network, the peer network, is so influential. In fact, that's one of the reasons why institutions where you actually have in-person education is important. Not only because the students can talk to the professor, which is anyway given, but they can actually interact with their peers in
Yes.
person, live with them, sometimes lived experiences. And you really made a point, which is actually, a very critical one. Now tell me the transition to CCMB, and how did that happen? That is now a turn, because from
Yeah.
physics to now you're going to molecular biology, cellular and molecular biology. And by the way, CCMB is in Hyderabad. Yeah, the full
Yeah.
form is Center for
Cellular
CCM,
and molecular
Molecular
biology.
Biology. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
CSIR laboratory, one of the premier institutions in molecular biology, other than National Center for Biological Sciences, perhaps at that time.
yeah, yeah.
Now there are a couple of more which are at the same level. So yes, but there was an interlude.
Mm,
After my MSc Physics, I was stuck with a couple of things. One, to do GR, apply for
mm,
GRE
mm,
TOEFL and get
mm,
out of country for PhD. I gave TOEFL, I got a fantastic score. Did not have 5,000 rupees for giving
mm,
GRE.
mm,
So I did job, one year. There was a gap year for which I did a job in government polytechnic, which is right
mm.
across the road around the university.
University,
Uh,
yes, yes. Mm,
University, yeah, I did some tiny jobs there of teaching
mm,
electromagnetism and other things. Did tuitions for university professor children's there. One of the
mm,
child who did very well in the board exam eventually, etc. And in the meanwhile, I got this opportunity of doing MTech in computational techniques in
mm,
University of Hyderabad.
mm,
School of Physics and Computer Science Department had it jointly. There was only one sole agenda at that point of time. Oh, by the time I was not even clearing my CSIR exam.
mm,
So I had attempted a couple of times, didn't work out. Despite me being extremely confident about it, it
mm,
was not working out. And then got into that. The agenda was very clear. My family background is not so good. I need to now get a job and
mm,
earn
mm.
money. As you rightly
Yeah,
said, you can't leave the money out of the picture. So I
picture.
need to
Yeah.
earn the money. And I still remember Professor D.G. Kanhere,
Mm,
when I asked him that I so strongly want to do PhD, what is your advice? Then he asked me one simple question. I still remember the place where we were standing and when he was asking this question. He said, "Do you think you are an exceptional physicist?" I said, "No."
mm.
Then he said, "Go and do something in computing." That's what he
Okay.
advised.
Okay. Okay.
He
Interesting.
used to lead advanced computing lab, incidentally,
Yeah.
doing a lot of work in condensed matter physics and similar areas, and material science and computational material science. Anyway, so bottom line, I went to University of Hyderabad because the
Mm,
idea was very clear that an MTech would get you a job in IT sector, literally speaking. So I went there, and calamity struck. Y2K happened.
oh my.
Uh, and the placements came down from our senior batch 200% to 40% or 50%
Mm.
around that. And despite that, I got
Oh,
a
okay.
job. Yeah, I despite that, I was
Mm,
one of the two people in my batch of seven who got a job. And that was 10,000 rupees
mm,
in a company in a
mm,
silicon,
mm,
in the Hyderabad is
mm.
one of the
Ah,
Jubilee Hills area, so one of
mm,
those areas. Anyway, bottom line, that was the time when I was, multiple things were happening. One, I had gotten a job. Second, I had cleared my CSIR examination, and I figured out what was going wrong, and I had cleared my CSIR examination. And I um, wanted to apply and get my PhD in biological sciences now. Because
mm,
by
mm,
that time, thanks to Professor Panigrahi, one of the very gem of a professor, Prashantu Panigrahi,
mm. Yes.
I had gotten exposed to a variety of topics, wavelet transforms, right from wavelet transform
Yeah.
to how to apply transforms to biological data and all that. So I was thinking, hey man, biology seems to be in a happening place.
Take
Now,
place.
this was a premonition. I was getting an
Mm,
early idea about
mm,
biology is a happening thing, by the way. Okay, because the genome sequence was just getting on the cover of Nature and Science.
mm,
That was year 2001, around that, right? So, well, I went to one of my batchmates. He was crucial for me into getting into CCMB.
Hmm.
Not batchmates, but one of the fellow person who was doing his PhD, MTech, MSc in life sciences. He had gotten into CCMB, and he told me that Ganesh, with your interest and with your kind of inclinations, I think CCMB will be a good place for you. First thing. Second thing, CCMB was open for anybody who has a CSIR fellowship, JRF fellowship, doesn't matter which discipline.
Wow. Wonderful.
That was amazing.
That's
Yeah.
amazing, even for that time.
Yeah, even for that time it was amazing. This
Yeah.
now it is common sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
anybody can do that now. But so people like the director at that time, Lalji Singh and others,
Mm,
they
mm.
were so adventurous at that time. So they said anybody who is bright enough and interested enough can do it. That was the idea behind it. So I went and I did well in the interviews and was selected for PhD. And it was a very momentous day. I would say it was my birthday. By the end of the day, it was the list of students, 18 students were announced who would be selected for PhD. I was one of them. Next day morning, I had 9 o'clock, I had two appointments. One, a cup of tea with Lalji Singh, Dr. Lalji Singh,
Mm.
the director
Huh?
CCMB, Padma Shri, so that he can introduce us to the laboratory and take us, I mean, tell us the path forward. And the second was HR of my IT company in which I had gotten a job, which was paying me 10,000 rupees. And the
Mm.
JRF was for 5,000 rupees.
Yeah.
And I had to take a call. I
Wow.
took
Yeah.
and I took a call of doing PhD. That's how it is.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What a story. What a story. It's amazing, amazing thing. See, this is something which is, again, I'm curious, and a lot of people would be also very interested in. First is, of course, how did you resolve this? What was your thought process? Second is, you need to have some, leap of, what should I say, intuition to really switch from physics to the computation. And by the way, computation 2024 is a great time for computation because Nobel Prize in Physics and Chemistry has already been announced, and you can see
Yeah,
that all of them has some relation to machine learning and also AlphaFold, etc.
yeah.
One of the things I would want to know, Ganesh, is your leap of intuition. How did you really make the kind of that directionality? You've really chosen it, and as you correctly mentioned that you probably was an early kind of entrant, even before physics students getting into let's say computational biology or biology per se. That is the second point. Is how did you make the decision? That is an important thing. Yeah. Mhm.
I think the decision was primarily based on this intuition. Now I can kind of look back and think about what might have gone through my mind. But probably the main thing that would have gone through my mind is this, that being an IT, it was a software developer job. It was a very glorified title.
Mhm.
Uh, but being an IT, a few years down the line, I would be one of those coolies
Mhm.
or mechanical workers from the 19th century who used to work in factories. My own grandparents did that in the cotton mill. Either
Mhm.
I could be that, or I could be in the innovation sector,
Mhm.
wherein I do what I think is curious, what
Yes.
I'm curious about, and I will do something interesting. I still didn't know what I will do in biology. As a
Mhm.
physicist who is trained in computer science, what am I going to do in biology was not clear to me. But it was an open ocean, in my opinion, that there was plenty that can be done. What I will decide later. But
Later.
I don't want to be a coolie in the IT sector, was something clear to me. And it had double the salary, I told you. And this was
Mm.
a Y2K period, recession, extreme recession that was going on. So I think that is how I said I'll do this. And again, credit to my parents. No questions asked.
Nice.
Hey, why are you
Nice.
leaving a 10K job and going for a 5K job? Hey, you had a
Mm.
student. I had taken a student loan of certain
Mm.
amount
Mm.
at
Mm.
that time, 25K from Canara Bank. How about repaying it? No questions asked. They said, do what you want to do. I was lucky that way, I would say.
You were indeed lucky to have very good parents. That is something which is
Yes.
very, very important. Second aspect is tell us a little bit about your transition into biology. CCMB is a very good place. Also, the topics what you are entering actually is uniquely placed because you have exposure to physics, but now you're venturing into biology via a computational approach, if I'm correct. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about your PhD experience. What did your overall learning from PhD?
My PhD experience was life changing. First of all, when I went into CCMB, as a physicist, I knew all physics and mathematics institutions very well, but I didn't know biological institutions, including CCMB. The only thing that I had heard about before going to CCMB from somebody whom I had randomly met is that they have televisions on which notices are flashed. That's all
Mm,
that at that time. Which is very old, right? That's all they had told me about. But what I realized after going there is that a few things started happening. The moment I went into CCMB, I realized that I'm in the middle of Nobel laureates, not the local Nobel laureates, but Nobel laureates who are visiting
yes,
regularly
yes.
CCMB. And it wouldn't be uncommon to find yourself with a Nobel laureate walking path within the premise of CCMB. And somebody will say, hey man, look at that Southern. What Southern? And I would say, who's Southern? What Southern? And they will say, come on, you don't know who is Southern? So my education would happen on footpath about what is Southern blot and how this gentleman has discovered it and did not patent it, and that's why he's a
Yeah.
gem of a human being. All of this would happen on the footpath. That was one thing. Second thing is that I would get to learn through osmosis from variety of people, all my friends, colleagues, batchmates, scientists who were there, predominantly sitting in a place called Baitak, a,
Mm,
a tea place.
mm,
So I
mm,
would sit there, and whoever comes, I would generally have a chat,
mm,
and
mm,
that would for them would be a casual chat. For me, it would be a learning experience. And there used to be a folder of research articles published from CCMB. I would just flip through them and try making sense of it.
mm,
That was second thing. Third was lectures. So there would be very frequent lectures in molecular biology. The very first thing when you get into any area, right, whether regardless of which area you get into, is to know the jargon. For me, getting the jargon happened through these lectures. So I simply would sit there and listen to things about blots, the southern blots, the northern. I mean, you say it, and I would learn it from those lectures, and then I'll go
mm.
back and make my notes, trying to figure out, okay, what is this
What
exactly
is
all
this
about?
actually?
I
Nice,
did go
nice,
through a formal education, but all of this is what I did. But don't
wonderful.
forget, all of this happened at the backdrop of a threat. On the second day of my joining, I was threatened that I was told very clearly that if you do not clear the grad school, you will
Mm.
be, in this exact same words, you will be kicked out of CCMB. I was told so. So remember, even after joining
Mm,
CCMB at a lower fellowship compared
mm.
to the salary that I would be getting, I was living under a threat that
Threat.
I might have to leave. And out of existential crisis, I had talked to one of the scientists,
Mm.
and he had told me that, Ganesh, why worry? You have done so far so
Yeah,
good,
so good. Yeah.
brilliantly in your
Mm,
career. Don't worry about it. You will make it. I said, I'm not worried, but I just wanted to sound it out to someone. So I
mm.
said, thanks for being a sounding board, and I'm now clear. I will do what I think is the best can be done. And the last thing probably I would like to mention is that I started learning things. I mean, remember, rest of them had done after 10th, so which means 7 years of biology rigorously through
Mm.
their academic curricula. Therefore, my learning, for example, that of genetics, would start at page number 233 of some classic genetic textbook. So that was like heavy immersion. It was
Yes, yes.
like deep sea immersion that you are doing in a scuba diving. So I've been taken directly into the topic. So it was a wonderful experience. Trust me, one of the most lively and enriching experience that I've had so far has been at CCMB.
Wonderful. I would want to emphasize this aspect. Biology is very welcoming, and physics is great for traveling.
Yeah.
This is something I always kind of, I'm very fascinated to see. And because, personally, educated in physics, I can see how beautifully it actually can give you paths to explore. And I've also found that biology is very, very open to really welcome people from various different branches, and the questions themselves are such kind,
Yeah.
because they will have to actually really be open, kind of in terms of whatever is actually coming in, the which would actually bring in new insight into their own problem. And this element is very crucial because many times students have this question, and since you actually have a lived experience of this, um, now as you mentioned, of course, in 5 minutes you did mention about the transition, but it would have not been easy for you, right? Because you would have had to go and learn a lot of things, and that too you're not doing it at a bachelor's or master level. Here you are in CCMB, one of the top institutions in the country and probably across the world for various problems related to cellular and molecular biology. And you have a background in physics, and who was actually about to become an astrophysicist, now he is doing this. So what was your hardship like? Was it something you really kind of immersed yourself in books? There were no, of course, YouTube channels and podcasts then. How did you
Yeah.
really learn things?
Books,
Hmm,
friends,
hmm,
scientists, casual discussions with friends and scientists, and attending lectures.
hmm,
These were four modalities that I used
hmm.
extensively. I to an extent have obsessive tendencies. So if I wish to do something, I would actually get myself immersed into it.
Immersion,
And
nice.
probably the last thing that I should mention is what is called as Saturday seminars.
Hmm,
So informal group of students coming together on a weekend, which is meant to be a relaxed day and doing nothing probably, because especially molecular biologists
hmm,
would be slogging day
hmm.
in and day
Day,
out
day out, yeah,
doing
yeah.
their
It's very
experiments. Yeah,
labor
for them
intensive. Yeah,
it's a labor intensive
yeah.
job, unless it is, I mean, some people tend to do it in a very smart manner, but
Hmm,
regardless of that, there is a physical labor
hmm.
involved. Just think about the fly work that is
Yeah,
involved, right? You have to do it, you can't just avoid it, right?
yeah.
You can't wish away from it. Uh, so uh, so despite that, on a Saturday many of
Hmm,
us would come together and talk on a topic which is not related to our research at all.
hmm, hmm,
Just pick
hmm,
something out which is curious, which has been published recently in one good journal, doesn't matter which journal it is, or you found it interesting and you talk about it. Okay, that would happen. And I have been voracious reader,
hmm,
and if you like, wanting to be an avid communicator.
hmm, hmm,
So I would find ways of communicating things like crazy. Believe it or not, I would, and there used to be a monthly meeting that CCMB used to organize where all scientists would sit, including the director. Of course, director would be the
yeah,
first thing to be there,
hmm,
uh, and then the rest of them would be there, and you talk for, I think, 5 or 8 minutes, or 8 or 10 minutes were given, and on one particular paper. So I used to use this opportunity. I think it was called group meeting. It used to
hmm,
call group
hmm,
meeting. So I used to use these opportunities for to talk about uh, chaos in Van Gogh's paintings,
hmm,
um, genetics of gender determination and whatnot. Whatever
hmm.
paper I have read, I'll pick it up from archive or from some other journal and would talk about it. So I would do all kind of these things. And I don't know, many of these molecular biologists and cellular biologists would find it extremely engaging, interesting, maybe entertaining.
Hmm.
So that's what I that's what I did at that point of time, and I love that whole experience, I must say. And
Wow.
I was
And
one of the kind. I
yeah.
was one of the kind. So they were, regardless of what used to happen, they would say, anyway, this guy is an outlier. So who cares?
Outlier.
Whatever he does
Okay.
is whatever what he does is what he does. Yeah.
One thing you mentioned, which I really want to get a little bit more insight into, is avid communicator. I see that actually has stayed with you in various different forms, because I've also heard, and I'll be linking some of your talks, including TED Talk and other very interesting seminars. Uh, this Where does this come from, Ganesh? Why do you want to communicate? It is probably one of the best strategies to learn something, at least in my opinion, and I assume you would also agree on that, because there is a remarkable tool there for anybody to learn. If you want to really communicate, your way of learning changes a lot. That's something we inherent to all teachers, for example, who like us, who generally come across. But it is also a general principle for learning. And it is very clear from your CCMB days that there is something which is there. Could you please just elaborate a little bit there? Yeah.
I was crazy about communication
Hmm.
to the extent that I used to bore people to making them come and listen to what I want to say.
Hmm.
So I still remember we had these graduate student seminars which used to happen, and there was a competition, like literally speaking, which I won
Hmm.
incidentally. That for preparing for that particular seminar, which is a 20 minutes talk, exactly 20-minute talk, a minute, not a minute more, I gave 3 mocks.
Hmm.
I put a recorder on the speaker to listen to what I am saying, to listen back to
Hmm.
it, to see what are the kind of redundant words that I'm using,
Hmm.
the ers and mums that I'm
Hmm.
doing, to take them out, etc. So the refinement, also other than being a communicator,
Hmm.
bringing that refinement was also another part of it. And I was so crazy about such things of communication that I still remember
Hmm.
that CCMB has this classic hall, very small now,
Hmm.
big one might have been built by now, where Nobel laureates are presented, of course,
Yeah. Yeah.
in that hall, in the very same hall. So I remember once I was giving a mock seminar, and Lalji Singh, Dr. Lalji Singh, the director then,
Hmm.
was very conscious person. He used to walk around and see whether there are lights on where there should not be any. So
Hmm.
he must have seen the lights turned on in the seminar hall and opened the door, saw nobody in the hall, no
Hmm.
one, not a single soul, except me standing on the podium and speaking.
Nice. Nice.
that was the
Wonderful.
level of
Hmm.
that was the level of craziness with which I would I would
Hmm.
practice
Hmm.
and practice. And when you do that, I believe you get into the skin of
Hmm.
the listener, the somebody whom you would like to communicate the message. And refinement, if you keep refining it also at the same time, other than repeating it, I think that helps a lot. That's the way it was in CCMB for me.
Superb, superb. It also is a great lesson for anybody who would want to actually, refine their thought itself, because that revision, for example, it is inherent in writing. When you want to put out something in writing, you would generally have to revise it. And a spoken word, of course, is sometimes kind of extempore. But if you refine it, the talks become much more clearer, and also, you'd be able to make things in a very particular way. So now
Yeah.
we're going to make a transition into your, further career post PhD. Before that, just briefly tell about your PhD problem, and then we'll look at the transition and subsequently your research interest.
So serendipitously, I hit upon this problem of modeling protein structures using graph as a paradigm.
Mm.
The idea was simple: to model them and see what are the properties of different type of proteins, the alpha class, beta class, alpha slash beta, plus beta. Are there, what are the properties there? I just wanted to examine them. That's what I wanted to do. Um, and around the same time, soon after joining, my supervisor was diagnosed with a form of a cancer. So she was busy, trying out of it, getting cured of cancer. So I was again left to my own devices, and I was fine with that. And I was working on this problem, and that led me to one interesting observation of how within a protein structure amino acids are quote unquote connected to each other through non-covalent interactions. There is a property called assortativity in the
Mhm.
networks of amino acids in a protein structure, within a protein structure. That is one of the primary observation that I did in my PhD, which we published in a journal called Bioinformatics.
Mhm.
And that remains still an observation which has not been violated. All globular proteins tend to have that property. And at that point of time, this property was important for condensed matter physicists because none of the protein structures were known to follow that kind of pattern. And
Pattern.
that is why I still remember people like Professor Deepak Dhar and
Mhm.
others. When I showed them the result for the first ever time, they were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
really? Oh, we didn't know that there are networks which are assortative."
Mhm.
And for me, it was amusement because these are senior people who were telling that, okay, I have found something interesting. So that
Mhm.
was my PhD problem.
Wow, wow, it's very, very fascinating. In fact, there is quite a lot of work now, thanks to also evolution of machine learning and other things which has evolved. And this AlphaFold actually is a kind of probably early origins are all in these kind of developments. What you just mentioned. So, were you by then during your PhD also thinking about a career which further took turns? Now you already are armed with this foundation in biology.
Yeah. So I think one of the common themes that has been there from astrophysics, astronomy and astrophysics,
Mm,
quantum mechanics, biology, or problems in biology, if you wish to call it, that's called enigma.
mm,
And one of the enigma that stung me literally when I was in PhD was that of brain.
mm,
Brain, cognition, consciousness. These were the problems which were haunting me. And at that time, there used to be short courses in computational neurosciences. I did two of them. I mean, generally people do one just to get exposure. I did two of them, one after the other. And I obviously was heavily interested in it. And thanks to some of the mentors in CCMB and outside, I was directed saying that, okay, if you really want to do neuroscience
mm,
related problem solving, it's a very, very crowded area.
mm,
Too many people working in that area. For example, the Society for Neuroscience meetings are like Kumbh Melas in the Indian
mm.
parlance.
Indian one. Good
so
one.
so yeah, I mean that was literally the word which was used to explain by one of the person who was explaining this domain to me, saying that you'll be lost, you'll be lost. It's so crowded. So unless you have really something out of the way, be careful. That is what I was told. But
Mm,
again, I said, let me try. This is my first and probably the last chance. When I'm doing my first postdoc, I should try this, because normally, as we know, academicians, we continue from the PhD problem because we have already spent significant amount of time working, thinking deeply on that problem. So we would rather continue. And for me, it was like, okay, I've done enough. I would rather try something which I am now finding interesting. So that's what I did. But in summary, when I went to NCBS and started working on the problem, I couldn't find any way. It was a
mm,
roadblock.
mm,
It was almost like I'm not finding anything going forward.
mm,
I
mm.
tried working on amygdala and trying to model the circuits of amygdala in Shona's lab, Professor Shumantra Chatterjee,
Uh-huh.
and not much could happen there. And that is where I made a switch back to protein structure modeling, because one of the advices, again, given to me without naming the person, is that if you want to get back to India in a respectable position as an academician, you need to have outside India exposure
Mhm.
for various good or bad reasons. I was told so. And I said, okay, fine. If that is mandatory, then I will go. And my PhD problem is the leverage that I
Mm.
can use for moving out of India. So I went to Max Planck
Max
for
Planck.
doing that. And before doing this, I ended up publishing, which we didn't talk about it at all,
Mm,
that I kind of do these experimentations. So application of graph theory on protein structures is one thing that I had worked on. Simultaneously, I had found one more interesting problem: application of graph theory on airport networks, network of
Yes,
airports.
it's
Yeah,
one of your most highly cited papers.
in
Yes,
fact, it's the highly cited paper.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
it's a single author paper.
Yes,
So
yes.
I did it out of curiosity as a PhD student.
Mm.
And that itself is a story about how I found the data, how I worked on the
Huh.
problem, how I outpublished one of the known researchers in that area.
Very
And he was
interesting.
amazed, saying that, hey, how come you worked on this problem? He said it in front of me, incidentally. So as a PhD student, by the way.
Mm,
And
mm.
yeah, and it was encouraged heavily by Professor Dhar
That.
and many others who
Mm.
corrected the paper, saying that this, I mean, quite clearly they seeing that he's a rookie and he doesn't understand many of the nuances of writing or statistics part of it. So they corrected me, like, and with patience they corrected me. So yeah, so that was one of the things that I published on the way. But yeah, I made a transit
Mm,
via computational neuroscience. The enigma of brain and consciousness has not gone out of my mind.
mm,
Don't forget that the root of that again is back to my Sholapur days,
mm,
because Gaudenz Bach by Douglas Hofstadter.
That-
There was a Marathi translation version, or not translation, it was not translation, it was a Marathi take on it, which was
mm,
available in the library, which I had read. And
wow.
from that day onwards, I've been wanting to look at, because Baudelaire Bach in one phrase is the difference between living and non-living. Full stop. That's all about it.
Nice.
That's all. I mean, it's a huge tome. I know that
Mm,
I've not been able to finish it in entirety from page to cover, but that's what it is all about. In summary, that problem has stayed in my mind, it still remains with me, and I keep reading about that. But yes, as a problem, as a career problem that I was working on, I moved back to protein structure when I went to Max Planck
mm.
Institute for Molecular Genetics.
Nice, nice, wonderful, wonderful. And most important transition, because now you are a very famous person in terms of the research what you're doing. Tell us how you got interested in food.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, as I said, food was non-material for me,
Mm,
in the sense that I was not interested in food per se.
mm,
Now
mm.
I am, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of subtle nuances of food, cooking, etc. I do understand much more today, having worked on it for the last 9 to 10 years now, starting from 2014. It's
Mm.
10 years now that I've been working on, right? But it happened in a classroom, believe it or not.
Wow.
And
Mm,
it happened again because of my way of, or my urge of wanting to make people understand something that I know so well, or I know well, let's put
mhm,
it this way.
mm, mm,
So I was teaching a course on complex networks or network science, as today's course
mm,
is called in Reply Delhi Network
mm,
Science. In IIT Jodhpur, it was
mm,
complex networks course that I was teaching to a bunch of, I think, 43 computer science engineers and electrical and communication engineers, maybe a couple of mechanical engineers thrown for a change.
mm,
They were
mm,
there. And well, while teaching, other than teaching using one of the textbook as a primary material, I would take examples of recent researches that have been done
mm,
about how graph theoretical modeling, which I use for protein structures and airport networks, etc., can also be used for modeling what is called as a flavor graph, ingredients,
mhm,
and how they are sharing flavor molecules amongst themselves. Because evolutionarily speaking, most of the living things do have some amount of sharing of molecules, including flavor molecules. So there is a nice, intricate network of ingredients, food ingredients, and sharing of the flavors that happens. And there was a then recent paper,
mm,
2011 paper, that was published from Barabasi's group, that was available, and I took that as an example. And
mm,
believe me, there was this aha moment that, hey man, if this interesting piece of research has been done and there is a generic phenomena which has been proposed, that there is a certain type of pairing which is known to be present
mm,
in the world cuisine, then what about the Indian cuisine?
mm,
Indian
mm,
cuisine is one of the richest and one of the oldest present across all the cultures. And why is it that the Indian cuisine hasn't been investigated? I
mm,
said, let's do that. It was just a thought, nothing grand about it. It was
mm,
just a passing thought that let's do this. And this happened not only in the classroom, by the way, it
mm,
got reinforced when I was evaluating the answer sheet. Oh, because I obviously used questions from those research articles for posing them to the students to check their understanding.
mhm,
So while checking the answer sheet, also it got reinforced. My goodness, this can be defined slightly differently. This analysis can be done in the context of India, blah, blah. All of that happened. And that was the seed of thought. And I presented this idea to my lab members. A couple of lab members, one of the MTech student and another PhD student joined the board. And we started investigating it. Again, not knowing what we will find, how
mm,
we will get the data, what will be the answer for it. But there is a smartness there, if you ask me. In retrospect, I can say that. Two things would have happened. One, you would have got a confirmatory result,
mm,
boring, if you ask me, that yes, food pairing is exactly the way it is found in the Western cuisines,
mm.
uh, but a confirmatory result, and we would have still got a result. Had it been contradictory, then it would be, aha, it's
Yeah.
different, right? And having already seen biological systems, I knew for a fact that compared to physical systems, which are replete with universal phenomena and constants, etc., you may or may not have similar kind of universal mechanisms in biology, or for that matter, social systems, because we are looking
Mm.
at social system now. That was my intuition. So with that, I actually started working along with a team of two students, and that was the beginning of this problem. It has nothing to do with any dish that I
Mm.
found delicious in a restaurant, or I keep telling jokingly in my talks that it's because my wife, who is a very good cook, so just to please her, which of course she is on the record. But at the same time, it was in a classroom exercise that I got this idea. That was the beginning of the whole story.
Very, very fascinating, very interesting. So, what was the crucial element of looking at this kind of pairing? Was it also something? Were there some other peripheral papers which you were also studying during that time? I know that the teaching actually played a critical role in such kind of an instance. Was there also a little bit of intuition which you were developing, because you probably took a computational approach to this particular
Yeah.
problem? Now, what was the general reaction, especially from people who are not in science? What did they think about this? Like, did it, first of all, really draw attention, or was it also something which people gradually got into the know-how? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. Before coming to people
Mm,
not in science, talk about people in science.
mm,
As usual, I'm a dumb ass, as I call myself. That what I do is that I put in Hindi, as it is called, "Aap bail mujhe maar," come and hit me. So I go and present my work
mm,
when it is uncooked, used to
mm.
use the cooking parlance, and say that, okay, this is what I'm doing, and
Uh,
people trash me like crazy most often. So I still remember a couple of my friends
mm,
and colleagues, physicists and applied mathematicians.
mm,
I
mm,
made them sit in a classroom and presented this work halfway through, saying that
mm,
these are our preliminary result
mm,
of what we are doing. And at the same time, I was doing other work also, in silico drug discovery, network biology,
mm,
target discovery, etc.
mm,
But
mm,
simultaneously, I had started with this also. So my hands were too full. I was doing too many things. So I presented this work to them.
mm.
They thrashed me like crazy. They said that this is rubbish, uh, as opposed to the interesting, exciting, and, to use their word, sexy
Mm.
work that you are doing in
Yeah,
silico drug discovery.
yeah,
Why
yeah.
are you doing this? That
Mm,
is so mainstream. And what is this rubbish about recipes, rasam, ingredients, and flavor molecules? Why are you doing this at all?
mm, mm,
That is what they questioned me. That was from inside the academia. That's how it happened. It took us 8 to 9 months
mm,
before we prepared the manuscript, because I could see with every experiment being done, we were getting more and more exciting results
mm,
about the uniqueness of the Indian cuisine in one way or the other way in terms of food pairing, and how spices play a key role
mm,
in the uniqueness, in shaping the uniqueness of the Indian cuisine. We were finding it with one experiment, another experiment, controlled experiment, another control. So we were doing all kind of statistical jugglery with the data
mm,
that we had with us at that time, and the results were amazingly coming out to be surprising to us, actually surprising,
mm,
interesting, exciting, everything. Well, that's when I was ambitious, sent it to some of the most prestigious journals, which got from where we got respectable rejections
mm.
after a couple of rounds of editorial
It will,
editorial discussions they did,
mm,
and not quick desk rejection overnight, but it
mm,
happened after a couple of editorial discussions. They rejected it, and the problem is that such kind of paper could not get into any standard bioinformatics journal.
mm.
For example, bioinformatics would ask me saying that this is neither structural biology, nor is it genomics,
Genomics.
nor
Yeah.
is it anything which fits into one of the sections that we publish under. So
Mm,
where do we put it? And that is how the paper kept on rolling. And I made a point at that point of time
mm.
to keep it on archive forever, and it is still there.
Yes, yes, yes. There is actually an archive update. I've seen that particular
Yeah, it
thing.
is still
It's
there.
wonderful.
A version of it was published in PLOS One, but
Mm,
the original paper, I was so adamant, and I
mm,
was so annoyed by the behavior of these some of these so-called prestigious journals that I said I will keep it on the archive forever. I will never publish it because I consider it is a classic piece. If it goes through review, it will come up with lots of unnecessary revisions, which I said I don't want to do it. I'll keep it as it is there. So that's how it happened. The moment that happened, two things happened. One, it got huge visibility thanks to MIT Tech Review.
Yes, yes.
MIT Tech Review picked it up without asking me. They did a wrote a small article on that.
Yeah.
And
I'll be linking that. In fact, they can actually people can look at it. Yeah.
That was the tipping point. That was the tipping point because I remember immediately I getting messages on WhatsApp, on call, on emails, also saying that, hey man, I saw your paper in MIT Tech Review, and I was traveling on that day from Ahmedabad to Jodhpur, and that was something magical that happened. That was last week of February of 2015 that happened, and first week was much more fun and interesting because then it was picked up by Washington Post, Wong blog, I think it is called, that and many others, like, and I got contacted by Hindu, which I respected a lot for their science journalism, by the way, and TOI, Times of India, and many others. Then it was a floodgates were opened. Floodgates were opened, and it was all over. And once it became very popular, surprisingly, the very same scientists who were skeptical, who were now saying, "Oh, wow, man, that seems cool. That seems cool. What you have done is rather cool." I mean, that is not fun for me. I would have rather they looked at the quality, the scientific quality, the work, the rigor of the work that we have done, and appreciated or not appreciated it based on that, rather than looking at the reflected glory that comes from the media and then making their opinion based on that. But nonetheless, that's how it happened actually. Got a lot of visibility, and outsiders, including practitioners, chefs, they started contacting.
Okay.
They started appreciating, and the appreciation was two-liners. We know the uniqueness of Indian cuisine, but you showed it scientifically. Thank you for that.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's actually kind of, it also tells that how scholarly work can bring in its own value. Because see that element of bringing rigor to the work and also analysis. For example, it's bringing like art and science together. That's an important point. A very interesting and important story what you mentioned. It's very, very critical for any student who also is venturing into that. And I'm very glad you also brought up this peer review part of it. It's one of the kind of bane of academia, unfortunately, where new ideas actually take a lot of effort to be put into the domain where everybody accepts it. Of course, again, there is a kind of a bias there because there are equally bad ideas which are there, but sometimes even the good ideas don't actually get the traction what is necessary. But eventually it is kind of come into the light. So now please tell us a little bit about your current work. What are the future projects you are now looking at before we kind of conclude?
Sure. So it happened, and it did not have a name. So it took me a year or so to come up with a name and to come up with the thought that there must be a name, because when everybody would ask me, what is this whole thing about, where people are talking about it, I would have to tell them the whole story and tell them what am I doing. So I coined a name called Computational Gastronomy.
Gastronomy makes sense.
It's about looking at food through the lens of data. Food and everything related to food through the lens of data. So that's the name that came up in a year or so after we published this work, and around 2016 or so. And three things in a large perspective happened after that. One is that I had not earned a single rupee from industry, despite working on sexy problem, according to my colleagues, of in silico drug discovery. Because people used to think that doing drug discovery is the place where you have money. But no, most of my work I'm not very proud of in terms of drug discovery. I mean, it's a rigorous work, but does it lead to something tangible? worthwhile? I don't think so. So it didn't lead to anything of industrial value, applied value per se. Not that it must be always, but it was not even of theoretical value, I mean, of importance. Nothing significant that we were contributing to the theoretical foundations of this area as well. So we were basically using the off-the-shelf tools and doing some analysis and hoping that it will lead to something worthwhile, which it did not happen. But then all of a sudden, food and beverages companies, FMCG companies started approaching me, starting with some of the biggest ones, by the way, started approaching me saying that, Professor Bagler, here is something that we want to do, want you to do. If you can do this for us, we will pay you so and so amount of money. And that was interesting for me, a small town, lower middle class, class boy coming here to this stage, earning only government salary. And this was interesting, curious turn of event for me. And another poetic justice was that these were the very same. One of these companies was was one such company where they rejected me when I had applied for at the formative stage. So for me, it was a sweet revenge that I said, okay, now I'll make money out of you.
So,
Okay.
so, so very interesting. So very interesting.
Yeah.
So,
So that was one part. What I mean to say is that commercial value, understanding the commercial value of the work that we are doing, applied value, commercial value, industrial value was one part of the aspect that I realized is extremely relevant, which I got it. Second, which I had, in fact, that was my first thought, is that blending food with cooking and food and cooking with computing and data science and AI, whatever name you would like to give it, is such a unique and dramatically different things. And creativity often comes by putting two things together, which otherwise nobody would have thought of bringing it together. So it's a barren land. Do ask interesting questions, answer them. Anything that you will do, you will be the first mover. And the first mover advantage is humongous in such areas. I had already seen it, whether it is airport network or protein structure modeling. I had already seen what is the value of being a first mover. So I said, I can be a first mover here. Our lab can be a first mover here, and we can do lots of interesting experiments, asking questions in this domain. So curiosity-driven questions was another thing, other than the applied thing that I could see. You can design algorithms, you can ask questions, you can do data analytics, etc. And some of this could be of potential commercial value. That was another thing that I thought of. And not immediately, but with time, I also realized that food has um, public health and nutrition connotations. And therefore, there is a huge value for using some of the algorithms, data, and tools that we are developing for those applications as well. So we are now working on all three of them. I'm doing consultancy with the food and beverages companies and tech companies also. Don't forget that it's not about restaurants and food and beverages companies only. These are tech companies where they see future down the line. 5 years down the line, 8 years down the line, there is a future there. So I don't want to name the companies, but these are giants in the tech sector, including IT tech sectors, those who would like to move in that area. So they want to use these data and algorithms. That's one of the prospective directions that we are seeing here. And questions we ask plenty. Whether a fusion of the recipe can be created. What is the definite? Can we create a data structure for a recipe? What are the precursors of a certain taste in a given molecule? What are the food pairing patterns in different cuisines? And there is no stopping there in terms of which cuisine you can look into, and many other questions that we do work on in the lab. And lastly, the public health nutrition is what we are working on. And the middle part, the way we work here, I must also mention that before we close, is that I'm heavily influenced by one gentleman, which I did mention earlier, called Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan and Antifragile. And he formally proposes, mathematically proposes that in the presence of uncertainty, a barbell strategy works the best. In terms of researcher, my interpretation of that is that you shall do a few researches which are conventional, which have a long-term goal and vision, but at the same time, you shall do a large number of small, tiny projects,
Project.
which most oftentimes would not yield any result at all, but when they do yield, they yield like crazy.
Crazy.
They are the gems
Mm.
that you might end up producing. So for example, in my lab right now there are 110 research interns working, and every
Mm.
semester that's a typical number,
Mm.
fluctuating between 70 to 100 working with me. We work on to the tune of 25 to 30 projects which we
Wow.
ideate and experiment with. And the agenda is very simple, that some of them might lead to fruition and come up with something really exciting that we otherwise couldn't have imagined. And it's a win-win game, because these are not all PhD problems. These are typically BTech, MTech level projects, where if the idea, even if the idea doesn't work, there is a lot of learning that you can actually take away, a student can take away from it. And whenever things work out fine to the level of publication, of course, everyone gets a credit
Mm.
in terms of having contributed towards the work. So that's what is the present layout and what's happening in my lab.
Wow. This also is a reflection of the point that how creativity works, because for listeners and also the viewers, what Ganesh has just kind of described is bringing two matrices and making them into a new matrix. That's what probably is also kind of one way of looking at creativity per se. And Ganesh, this has been a fabulous kind of hour for us to really listen to you and also watch you describe your whole kind of process. I also see that there are new avenues which you are venturing, and you also are unique in the sense that you have been able to also interface with the public very well, not only public in general, but also with industry. And you also communicate science, and also have been scholarly in terms of your exposition in various different forums. uh, so what is the last question is, what is your broad lesson from all these things? What have you learned? And of course there's still more for you to do, but or an overview and kind of a broad lesson from all these experiences.
If I were to draw a single lesson out of all that we talked
Mhm.
in the last so many minutes, I would say that be anti-fragile.
Mhm.
And to learn what is anti-fragile, please read the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Mhm.
Life is full of uncertainties. Share market is full of uncertainties, and most domains of life come with uncertainties. And dealing with uncertainties requires you to have what is called, was what Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls as convexity in the life. Convexity, you need to have those convexity, and that is where being I'm sorry, I'm not able to define and
Yeah, yeah,
provide exposure to what is being anti-fragile. That in fact is an exercise to the readers,
yeah.
or figuring out what it means to be being anti-fragile. But be anti-fragile is a two-word message that I would like to give to myself, even at this stage, and to others who are listening.
Fabulous, fabulous. So, with this kind of exposition, and also the information what we have gained, also the knowledge what has been actually pumped into Pratidwani, I really thank you, Ganesh, for this wonderful, open-ended kind of information sharing or also knowledge sharing. And I wish you all the best, and I am very sure we'll have you again sometime in Pratidwani, where we continue the conversation and also learn more about what you have been doing, and some very creative work what you have been also venturing into. So thank you very much for your time, and also the sharing of knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you, Pawan. Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Talking and reflecting on my journey itself has been a pleasure in Pratidwani. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. This is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science, this time with the one and the only Ganesh Bagler. Thank you, Ganesh.